We are back talking vintage sports from the old garden at 48th Street. Nedick's no longer there. The old garden no longer there. And 5 or 6 of us from the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network are here. Let me start with Hal Bock. How are you this evening, sir?
Hi, I'm fine. Good to talk to you guys.
Good. George Case III is here.
Yep, same for me. I always enjoy these conversations.
Alan Blumkin.
I'm here. Always enjoy this. By the way, I don't know if you know if the Cub-Washington game was rained out tonight.
Oh, okay. A little update.
Thanks for the update.
We'll be playing at 1 Eastern time tomorrow.
Okay. We have a guest from the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network, the New York City Baseball, past, present, and future, Marty Rose from Jackson Heights, and Hal's alma mater, the AP. Hey, Mert.
Hey, Ralph. Well, hello, everybody. Glad to be here.
Good. Who else is here? Is David Hubler here? He was to show. Anybody I forgot to mention?
Tony D'Angelo.
Tony D'Angelo, how are you, sir?
I am fine, thank you.
The godfather of the Comfortably Zoned Radio Network. And we are kind of this is a bittersweet show. We're going to remember 2 Hall of Fame athletes, just terrific icons in their respective sports, who passed away within the last week or so. First to go, if I'm not mistaken, was Connie Hawkins, the late, great Connie Hawkins, and followed closely by YAT, Y.A. Tittle, former San Francisco 49er, New York Giant quarterback, who really was terrific throwing to Del Schaffner. And I want to go around the horn and get your memories of these 2 terrific athletes. Let's start with Connie Hawkins and start with Hal Bock, if you would. Hal.
Well, I remember Connie Hawkins as being an outstanding high school basketball player from Brooklyn, from Boys High School. And there was a game in Madison Square Garden matching Boys High and Wingate. Wingate had a kid named Roger Brown, who later played in the ABA with the Hawk. And it was a showdown of monumental proportions. What a great game. Tickets were really going for high prices for a high school basketball game at the Garden. But it was a show. These 2 kids put on some show. Hawkins was a magnificent athlete. He was above and beyond as a high school basketball player. I mean, you know, high school basketball players, the level of basketball is going to be what it is. But Connie Hawkins, from day one that I ever saw him, I mean, you knew that he was bound for greatness. And his story, it's a sad story, really. It can be found in a book named Foul, which was written by his agent, David Wolf. And Connie Hawkins was blackballed out of the NBA because he was alleged to be involved in a fixing scandal, which he had nothing to do with. And he sat out several seasons, played with the Harlem Globetrotters, played in the ABA with the Pittsburgh Pipers, before he finally cleared his name. His name got cleared, and he wound up with the Phoenix Suns and became a Hall of Fame player in the NBA. So I remember Hawkins very well, and he was a terrific player from day one. What a high school talent he was. I mean, he was just above and beyond.
He left much of his game in the ABA by the time, and I think he had to sue to get into the NBA.
I think you're right. I
believe that's right.
Yeah.
He got $1.3 million, Ralph.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, back in those days, that was quite a lot.
A piece of change, yes.
Yeah. Right. In a statement on Facebook, Hal, earlier in the week, you said that the first person you ever saw fly was Elgin Baylor.
That's true.
And Connie did some flying too.
Absolutely. I'll tell you the story about Elgin Baylor.
Please.
In the old days at the garden, the vintage garden that we talk about here every Tuesday night, they used to have college basketball doubleheaders, and the University of Seattle came into the garden one night. Now, in those days, we didn't have ESPN, we didn't have the internet, so teams from west of the Mississippi River, you just never saw or heard anything about them. So I was in the garden that night because NYU was playing, and I was in the press box. And the first game of the night, the University of Seattle played I don't know who, and they came out for warm-ups. And here comes number 22, Elgin Baylor. And he starts doing things I'd never seen a basketball player do before. I mean, he flew. He flew through the air with the greatest of ease. He was a sensational
and his hang time was incredible.
Amazing. Humans can't do that. And yet he was able to do it. And I remember my jaw dropped when I saw him play that first game in the garden. And so that's a memory I will never forget.
Wow. Marty Rose, you and I grew up in the garden, if you will.
Yeah, we used to get a lot of free tickets in those days, Hal.
Yeah, Hal, for
one reason or another.
Free is always good.
Yeah. Back in those days. Yeah.
The AP was something else to us. Everybody out there may know or may not know, Marty's uncle was the late, great sports writer Murray Rose from the AP, and was Hal's associate for many, many years. Marty worked for the AP. You two were acquainted back in those days. And in those days, the teams would give sports writers extra tickets.
I wouldn't know anything about that.
Oh.
I'm sorry, I don't know anything about that. I plead the Fifth Amendment.
Yeah.
You also failed to mention, Ralph, you mentioned Murray Rose, but Marty's father, Jack Rose, also worked at the Associated Press, another great guy. So the whole family was there.
Marty, may I tell the story for the 80th time on these airwaves about Jack, your dad, and my mom?
Go ahead.
I've never heard it.
All right. Well, here we go. It's 1964, and the Mets are going to open at Shea Stadium. They're going to open Shea Stadium. They'd been in existence for two years, and it was opening day, and everybody played hooky to go see that game. Everybody in our neighborhood played hooky to go see the game. And I come home from school. My mother says, "How was school?" I said, "It was great." Well, let me proceed. Tell you what happened. Jack worked swing shift. Was it swing shift or graveyard, Marty?
Right. Well, he alternated, but he mostly swing shift. Yeah.
But he was generally home during the day, and my mother runs into Jack. They're going shopping or they're hanging out on the, in the neighborhood, and they says, "Your dad's such a friendly, gregarious guy. Kids have a nice day for a baseball game." My mother didn't give me permission to go to a baseball game. I was playing hooky. So I come home. How was the game? How was your day? It was great. How was school? Blah, blah, blah. She let off, smacked me right upside the head for that. Marty, it was something like over 9 guys sat in our section in right field.
We took up a whole row. I think there was about 17 of us. It was unbelievable. Wow. Everybody from the schoolyard was there that day. And the upper deck,
that was pretty cool. That was so nice. And I remember him as so positive and really a terrific guy. So.
Yep. But anyway, getting back to our topic.
Memory of the Hawk.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of memories of him. I mean, just what I read, just what Hal was saying when he was in high school. The kid at age 11 was 6'2" and was dunking. I mean, and he, I guess most people, a little bit younger would know what Dr. J was about, Julius Erving. Well, he was very similar. He played very similar to Dr. J. Like the huge leaps and playing above the rim. He was tremendous. But one thing you may not know or remember, one little ditty about it is that when he was going into the NBA draft, there was a coin flip, and the Suns lost the coin flip. The winner of the coin flip got Lou Alcindor. And, later to be known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, of course. And the Suns had the second pick, and they took our guy that we're talking about here.
Neil Hawkins. They took Neil
Right, Neil Walk, who later became paralyzed.
Yeah.
If I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, he was the flip side. He went to the Knicks eventually, and somebody asked me what they get him for. I said, so Red Holtzman would have somebody go to the synagogue with him on Connie Hawkins got in because of a lawsuit. That was the whole book. Foul was about that.
Right.
Yeah, and as Marty says, $1.3 million settlement.
Yeah.
Not chopped liver, especially in those days.
Right.
So, okay, Al, you want to? You have anything to talk about Connie? The
game that Hal referred to in the Garden. I was there because my high school, Martin Van Buren, played Columbus in the other semifinal that day, and we got clobbered. And then we stayed for boys in Wingate, and that was an incredible performance by both of them. The difference was Connie Hawkins had a pretty good supporting cast, while Roger Brown was essentially a one-man show for Wingate. And boys won the game fairly easily, and then the next time they beat Columbus 21-15. Columbus decided that the only way they could possibly have a chance was to freeze the ball. So that's what happened. Was
Lenny Wilkins on that team?
No, that was after. Wilkins and Tommy Davis were a few years before Connie Hawkins.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
At boys' high.
And I want to ask you this: did they both play together in the ABA with the Pittsburgh Wrens?
Yeah, no, that was the ABL, which was a really minor league. The only thing that really came out of that league was George Steinbrenner owning the Cleveland team. And I was at Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh, when the Wrens were there. But I hardly got to see them play because they used to play Saturday nights, which was the same time that Pitt played their basketball games. And a couple of times I did see him. He was sensational, but the league was not very, very good. And then he barnstormed after that league folded up after a year and a half, 2 years. And he went to the ABA, and then the lawsuit was filed saying it was wrongly blackballed from the NBA because of stuff that went on during his short time at Iowa, which had recruited him to play college ball there. And they won the suit, and he got into the NBA. But he was a little bit past his prime when he got there, even though he did have some pretty good seasons there. But he had Marty was right. He did have a game similar to Julius Erving.
Okay. Were his indiscretions in high school or in Iowa? At Iowa.
Iowa. It was at Iowa.
Yeah, college level.
Yeah.
Okay, he had no problems in high school.
No, and with college, with college, he was not, college material academically.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So that Iowa took him, and I guess they promised him all sorts of stuff.
Keep him eligible, that sort of thing.
Students take his tests and whatever. You have to keep him eligible. I mean, it's not. It wasn't different back then, as it is today.
Oh, the only thing is, it's a different decimal point or two.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But that was he's only there for a very short time, and the NBA at that point was banning anybody because they were burned terrifically by the 1951 scandals. They had kicked Alex Gross and Ralph Beard off the Indianapolis team because they were, found that they were fixing games that they were at Kentucky. Mm-hmm. So the NBA had a very, very strict policy of no mercy to anybody who had the slightest taint of, the slightest taint. So they blackballed him and Roger Brown and a few others from playing in the NBA until the suit. And the book Foul was excellent. I read it years ago. I have it lying around somewhere. And Bob Wolf was the lawyer who wrote the book. David Wolf, who wrote the book, was a lawyer who represented Hawkins and was able to win the suit against the NBA.
And he's the one who wrote the book. It's David Wolf.
David Wolf, yes.
Must correct you because I wrote Bob Wolf on
with one F.
Facebook posting, and somebody corrected me.
Yeah.
So I want to go to I want to snake this around a little bit because we're going to talk about Y.A. Tittle, and I want Tony D'Angelo first to comment on Connie Hawkins, and then to start us on the late Y.A. Tittle. Tony D'Angelo from Connecticut.
Thank you. I'm honored. The first I knew about Connie Hawkins was the ABA, and I'm going back to, I think I was in junior high school in the late 1960s, and I turned on Channel 9 in New York, and there was this basketball league, and they're playing with a red, white, and blue ball, and they've got a three-point line, and they do the inbounds from the half. What is this? Oh, that's the ABA, my brother said. That's a new league. And there's Connie Hawkins. He's probably one of the best basketball players that ever lived, and I watched him, and I was amazed. I did follow the suit. I did read the book. I played baseball years later with a fella, Joe Mazzella, who had played against Connie in the Rucker. And one night I was remarking, and I said, he's an incredible player. And he said, you didn't see him back then. He says, he was the best player that ever lived, period. And of course, there's no record of it, going as far back as it is. But it's interesting. I mean, two things in the conversation kind of piqued my interest. Walter Kennedy, who was the commissioner of the NBA, was probably one of the leading proponents in banning Connie Hawkins. And Walter Kennedy, he lived in Stamford. His family and my family went to the same church. I would see him take the collection. I mean, he was Mr. Kennedy. And one time he was mayor of Stamford. And his son is still there, Bob, who was a sports writer. I spoke to him briefly about a year ago. But it all gets very close to me. And the other thing is, Marty had mentioned, the then Lou Alcindor. And I could remember, I must have been about maybe 6th grade, 7th grade, the whole dilemma of should Lou Alcindor go pro, but he's not going to complete college, and there's this tragedy, and what are we doing in college if we don't let these boys complete their education? But yet there's a hardship for the family, and Lou later, Kareem stayed, but it's just, it kind of shows you where it all goes, where back then it was a big moral dilemma that someone doesn't complete college, and now you have somebody a year and a half and they're in the NBA. It's just, where have we gone, Joe DiMaggio? So that's my recollection of Connie Hawkins, a guy who history should have been kinder to, but yet did a remarkable work nonetheless. And
hey, I can't let you snake into YAT yet. I got to go to George Case.
Oh, please do.
The unforgettable George Case, and you were back in the day. You were selling athletic shoes back.
Well, I was, and that was my earliest memory of Connie Hawkins. I went to Pittsburgh and really was starting to sell some of our pro kids basketball shoes, and spent a lot of time at the Civic Arena. And Alan will certainly know about the Civic Arena. And the fact that the Pittsburgh Pipers left and became the Minneapolis Pipers and then came back as the Pittsburgh Condors. And that first time I think I ever saw a basketball game, it was the Pipers, and Connie Hawkins was playing, and he was an incredible talent. And, as I had mentioned before, and some of the people talk about flying, Connie Hawkins flew. And many of the same moves that Julius Erving, Dr. J, he developed over the years. The first time I ever saw it was when Connie Hawkins was doing that. So, I dated back myself back into the Connie Hawkins days with Pittsburgh. And even before that, and Alan brought up a team that's probably very obscure, the Pittsburgh Wrens, and they played at the Civic Arena. And I was a co-worker a couple years later with Neil Johnston, who was the great player, center for the Philadelphia Warriors. And Connie Hawkins played for the Wrens, and Neil Johnston and I became very good friends. Neil Johnston was selling golf equipment, and Neil and I used to laugh because I would go into sporting goods stores and people wanted to talk to me about baseball. Neil would go into the golf shops, and everybody wanted to talk to him about basketball. So, my memories of Connie Hawkins and the early days of basketball, that goes right back to the beginning when Connie had just come out of all that scandal, and I knew about Jack Molinas. He was a Columbia guy, and he was the attorney involved, and I was playing college basketball at the time, and we were playing Columbia, and Chet Forty was the big Columbia star in those days. So, I'm very familiar with ancient history of all that went on with Connie Hawkins in basketball.
And Chet Forty became a very excellent TV producer.
Yes,
who, if I'm not mistaken, put the Monday Night Football trip together.
He did. True.
He did. Chet Forty made a fortune, and he really made his name with ABC. And when I was, I think it was a sophomore, Chet the Jet, that's what his nickname was, Chet the Jet 40, he set a Rutgers gym record. I think he scored something like 40-some points. And he scored off my fraternity brother, who later became the basketball coach at the University of Bridgeport. Bruce Webster was the captain of the Rutgers team, and his assignment that night, I'll never forget it, was to guard Chet 40. And we kidded him afterwards, said, "Nice going, Bruce. You did a great job. Chet 40 just set a gym record."
How'd you like to be Neil Johnson and one of the real good centers, solid centers?
Yes.
Neil Johnson was a three-time
NBA World
champion. And he and Paul Harrison keyed the 1955-56 Warrior team, which won the championship. And
they did, Alan. And you know what? You know how tall Neil Johnson? Neil Johnson was a center. He's 6'8".
Yeah, he tore his knee up a couple of years. I think the 2 years after that, and that was basically the end of his playing career.
Right.
Left-handed hook shot, if I remember correctly.
Right. His nickname was Lantern Jaw. And Neil and I became very, very good friends, and he was a great talent, but he was very undersized. When you look at the centers today, when they're 7'1", 7'2", here's Neil Johnston, and he's 6'8". So, again, my memories of Neil Johnston and the Pittsburgh Pipers and Connie Hawkins, dated back into the early 60s.
I want to chime in here. I've got a question. We talked before about this great basketball game at the Garden between Wingate and Boys High and Roger Brown and Connie Hawkins. Now, these were two kids from Brooklyn in the hard streets, right?
Yeah.
And they landed at the University of Iowa in the middle of nowhere. Right. What could that's culture shock. How could whoever sent them or whoever recruited them to go to Iowa, of all places, it's just beyond me. Now,
so I was going to ask, Hal, I was going to ask you that because, it's sort of, it's interesting for me to think about it when you talk about, Connie going to Iowa, Kareem going to UCLA, which obviously, that's California, but also, Wilt Chamberlain, he wound up playing college basketball in Kansas.
Yep, it's the same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, and the other thing I wanted to point out, we mentioned the ABA and how Hawkins made his name in the ABA along with Roger Brown before they ever got to the NBA because of the litigation and everything. The ABA
Did Roger Brown ever get to the NBA?
Yeah, I think when they merged, he was still playing
for the Pacers. He played for the Pacers.
I've been playing for Indiana when they were brought into the NBA.
That's right. That's right.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what I wanted to say is that the ABA, and Tony pointed this out, about the three-point shot and the red, white, and blue ball. The ABA was a wild league. I mean, it was really strange stuff going on in that league. The NBA
was some terrific talent. You had Artis Gilmore and
that's right.
Zomo.
I mean, they were all kind. Dr. J was the, I said before that the first guy I ever saw fly was Elgin Baylor. Well, Dr. J might have been the second guy I saw fly because he did some things in the ABA with the Nets that were just remarkable. And when he got to the NBA, he was still a great player, no question about it, with the Philadelphia 76ers. But he was kind of restrained. The ABA, nobody was restrained. Everybody did their thing. And it was a lot of fun to cover ABA games in those days, and I covered several of them. So that was a different time.
They used to have a couple of ABA doubleheaders in the old Garden.
Yes, they did.
Each year, and I went to those.
Now, what was the New York team? Was the New York Nets playing out of the Island Garden Arena?
Yeah, and then they played
at one time. That's correct.
Yeah.
I don't remember last night's dinner, but I remember that.
I was in the Island Garden once. I knew somebody who worked for them for a while. I saw a couple of games in the Island Garden. It was basically like being in an airplane hangar.
Yeah.
Didn't they have Fultz? Fultz was their center at that
Billy
time.
Fultz and Bill Mulcahy was one of their guards. And
Lou Carnesecco was the coach.
On Facebook. Yeah,
that's
they had
right.
Larry
coach
King
at that time.
on them.
And he talked about coming out to the bench wearing an overcoat because it was so cold.
It was terrible then.
I mean, that place was...
They played in Comac one year, which was
they did.
Which was over an ice hockey rink.
They were like orphans. They were just shuttled from one place to another.
And they
started out in New Jersey.
In Comac because of the ice the ice had melted or something like that.
They started out as the New Jersey Americans.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, right.
Then they wound up on Long Island, and then they wound up in New Jersey again, and now they're in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
I mean, they're like orphans moving around.
Right. What a horrible year they had in Brooklyn this year.
Well, that's thanks to the genius Billy King, who was their general manager, and traded away all their number one draft choices to get two used-up players. Paul Pierce was used up, and
Kevin Garnett.
Kevin Garnett was used up.
They gave the Celtics draft choices for the next 100 years.
And they still owe them a number one draft choice next season. So I mean, it's just they were stripped of any hope of building a franchise.
Well,
now they're really in the beginning stages. Now they finally traded Brook Lopez to Los Angeles, and then they've got a very young team now, and we'll see if they can put anything together. I have my doubts.
When they came into the NBA, they were supposed to have Tiny Archibald and Julius Erving, and all of a sudden they sold Irving to the Sixers because Roy Bowe, who owned them and the Islanders back then, had cash flow problems, and they charged the Nets at the time a humongous indemnity fee to pay the Knicks for territorial invasion. And that's why they sold Julius Irving to the Sixers.
Very interesting. There was a forward that played opposite Julius Erving in Philadelphia really early on, who who was really good too, and there was only one basketball. I'm trying to think of his name and can't.
Barkley? No.
No, this is way before Barkley.
George McGinnis?
George McGinnis.
Yeah, he came out of Indiana. He, after they came into the NBA, it was a situation not unlike the Net situation where the Pacers sold him to the Sixers.
Another sport that you're a maven at, Al. You never cease to amaze me.
Thank you.
And, okay, let's start with Tony D'Angelo on the late, great Y.A. Tittle. Tony, how did the New York Giants get him from the 49ers? I know it was Lou Corleone. How did they pull off that trade? That was terrific.
Well, I guess they thought the 49ers thought they had Brody, and they thought he was through. And I guess they had him to back up Charlie Connerly, who's a little bit before my time. But my recollections of Y.A. Tittle was, he was the quarterback of the New York Giants, and when I first saw him on commercials, it amazed me that he was a man from the South. And I thought, being from New York, you got to sound like a New Yorker, but he didn't sound like a New Yorker. The other recollection I have of Y.A. Tittle, and this may sound kind of dopey, but, it was just something that struck me when I was a small kid following the team. Whenever you saw him practicing and warming up, he always wore a Yankee hat. And I thought, well, what is he doing wearing a Yankee hat? And my brother would say, well, he plays for a New York team. I'd say, yeah, but doesn't he have a New York Giant football hat? He says, well, they don't have New York Giant football hats. Yes, he uses a Yankee hat. So,
they shared a locker room.
Played games in Yankee Stadium.
Yeah.
And then
Y.A. Tittle was prematurely bald, I think, wasn't he, Tony?
Yes.
That's why I think he probably wore a hat, because the only pictures I remember seeing of him with his helmet off was, with his bald head.
Yeah. And there's that iconic picture of him kneeling down.
Right, with the blood streaming down, right.
Scared me.
Somebody on Facebook today made a great joke. After all these years, they didn't mind when he was kneeling down.
I don't think he had much choice, the poor man.
No, that was the end of the Giants.
He was pretty beat up, from what I
That was the end
understand.
of the Giants for about 20 years.
Right.
Trying to collect his marbles. Yeah.
And speaking of that, I just quickly browsed something. Goodell, the commissioner of the National Football League, is now basically demanding that everybody stand up.
He's demanding respect, yeah.
For who?
Well, I mean, he's demanding, I don't know if it's a demand, but it's probably a strong suggestion that everyone should deal with the anthem in the traditional way, as well as I understand it.
Okay. Well, tradition is changing, I think, and some of the owners are backing the players that are not standing up. The Steelers owner, for instance, took his team the coach takes his team into the locker room when they're playing the national anthem. So this is a juggernaut of problems.
It certainly is.
Go on.
Well, the whole point of the protest that started with Colin Kaepernick had nothing to do with the national anthem. The protest was racial injustice in America, and calling attention to racial injustice in America. It was not disrespecting the Star-Spangled Banner. It was disrespecting racial injustice in America. But to expand it to the Star-Spangled Banner, which apparently served the needs of the President of the United States, now you've got a really hot button issue here, and it's not good for the NFL, not at all. To have the NFL doesn't like this sort of thing. The NFL likes just staid as we talked before about the button-down NBA, the NFL likes to be buttoned down too. That's why they don't like the celebrations in the end zone. They want you to play block and tackle football, and they don't want distractions. And this has become a tremendous distraction. So it's a problem for Roger Goodell.
It's really our national chocolate cake, and now the cake is bitter, and that's it's our dessert at the end of the week. And now we're not liking our dessert, or it's controversial. And
well, it's not just football, guys. The A's have a young catcher who didn't want to stand, cleared it with his bosses beforehand, and is making the protest. And I think it's a rightful protest.
Our fearless leader, Ralph, is PO'd at the NFL because they wouldn't let him in. He tried to force his way in through the USFL when they won an antitrust suit for $1. The triple damages is $3. And then he made an attempt a number of years ago to buy the Buffalo Bills from the estate of Ralph Wilson, and they awarded it to somebody else. So he's PO'd at the National League because they said no to him. The NFL, because they said no to him.
Absolutely.
Everything about this guy is vindictive.
Right. Oh, about Trump, absolutely.
Oh, yeah.
That's a show for another day.
Yeah, I know, yeah. I'm sorry for bringing that up, but I just had
Oh, no, please. Anytime somebody injects something like that isn't me, it's great because, hey, we have to be the people that point stuff, the injustice is of the world out, because we have a terrific podcast is a terrific medium. We're not controlled by advertising. We're not controlled by station breaks to break up interviews at inappropriate time. This is great. Let's continue to take advantage of it and get the word out when there is injustice. Marty YAT.
YAT, yes. Well, we used to see half the games that were played, Ralph, if you remember, because when we were kids, the home games were blacked out. And we would be in the schoolyard with our transistor radios listening to Marty Glickman do the broadcast. So that was a lot.
And who is his color guy on the radio? Al DeRogatis.
Yeah, Al DeRogatis.
Al was
yeah, he was
terrific. What a teacher of X's and O's. He really was terrific.
Well, I remember him when he first went on TV with Kurt Gowdy, I think. He used to tell you what the play was going to be ahead of time. So many times. He was very good.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
Well, I tell you, you mentioned that whole era around where I was growing up in Stamford. There were a lot of Giant fans that went out and bought these contraptions for their homes. You mentioned a blackout, Marty.
Well, people used to come up to the bars there to watch the games.
Yeah, well, they bought these things. They looked like satellites on top of the house called Channel 3 antennas. And what they were antenna boosters that were designed to get a very fuzzy and very grainy broadcast of the Giant game coming out of Hartford, Connecticut. And you could maybe get a little audio and it was, what people would do. And then, occasionally when I will be down in New Haven and I'll be winding my way back home, and to go away from, where the interstates are, where the traffic is, I'll occasionally take the state roads. And there's a lot of little motels, especially along Route 15, that are just, almost like manufactured. And what these were known as was Channel 3 motels, because when people came up from New York, they would take out a motel room on a Saturday and go in there and watch the game on a Sunday and then go back to New York. The whole existence of these hotels, a lot of now, which are not really being used at all, was so people could come and watch the Giant games. That's how big it was.
So I remember
it was very big.
The 1962 championship game, went with a few of my college friends from New York to one of our friends in Philadelphia to watch that game because it was blacked out here.
Mm-hmm.
That was the Bears with Eddie O'Brien.
The ice ball with Green Bay when it was 40-mile-an-hour winds at 0 degrees. The only touchdown the Giants got in that game was on a block punt. They had, the wind and cold just completely wiped their offense out that game.
Well, when Tittle came to New York, Charlie Connolly was the quarterback, and I guess from what I've seen, a lot of the teammates preferred Connolly and didn't really care that Tittle was there. But
Connolly was basically. I'll tell you a very quick story. The Giants used to play at Pitt Stadium when they came in to play the Steelers because the Steelers, neither the Steelers nor the Giants could get into the baseball parks before the season was over. So the Giants were always up in Pitt Stadium. They came up in like the second game of 1961. Okay, they got blown out by the Steelers, 31-0. A Notre Dame quarterback named Ralph Tyko was a quarterback in that game for the Giants. I told my friends that they're going to open up the office the next day and trade for somebody. And the next day they opened it up and they traded for Tittle. Connolly was really, I think that was his last year. He was, old, very old to begin with.
You know, when Connolly was reaching the end, they had quarterbacks on the depth chart like Frank Gifford.
No, Gifford played defensive back.
Oh, he did, but he was on the depth chart itself.
Yeah.
In case anything happened.
Yeah.
And he came in a few times.
Yeah.
And Alan reminded me that Gifford started out as a defensive back.
His rookie year, he was a defensive back, and then they converted him to offense in the second year.
Really great athlete from Connecticut, lived in Connecticut, from Bakersfield, California.
Yeah, the first time I ever
Connecticut, am I right, Tony D?
Yeah.
He lived in he lived in Greenwich for many years, I think, with his second wife. Then when he married Kathy Lee, they had several houses in Greenwich. They had one in the north end, then they had one down by the coastline where I think she still is. I mean, occasionally you go to Greenwich on a Saturday afternoon, you would see them walking around and, with their children who were then small.
Yeah.
He wasn't particularly friendly. He wasn't unfriendly. You'd say hello. He'd give you a very reserved hello back. He really wasn't an affable person or an endearing person. He was. He seemed kind of, at least one of the times I said hello to him, sort of like, why are you saying hello to me, kind of thing.
Wow.
But,
by the way, Y.A. led the Giants to 3 division titles in the 4 years that he was there. And I don't know how many people remember that, and he also gets credit for creating the alley-oop pass to R.C. Owens. Throwing it up there, and R.C. Owens could jump very high, was bigger than the cornerbacks, which you see that now all the time, but he was like the first guy to do that.
What happened when the 49ers instituted the shotgun on a regular basis, they didn't feel that, Y.A. was like 34 already, and he 33, 34, and they didn't feel he had the legs to operate that, and they had Brody, so they traded Y.A. to the Giants for a rookie lineman named Lou Corleone.
Corleone, right.
Yeah.
Hey, there was also a third quarterback in there that played the shotgun with the 49ers that was in the mix. I can't think of his name either. But there was, and Corleone was kind of a flop. He wasn't getting playing time with the Big Four, whom we talked about last week. Cat Cabbage, Modulewski, Rosie Greer, and
Y.A. started with the Baltimore Colts in the old AAFC, and that team came into the NFL in 1950, and they folded after that one season. And he was put in the draft there, the special draft, and the 49ers took him. Frankie Albert, who was the quarterback there, who was starting to get old, and Y.A. became the regular quarterback for 10 years. And he had some terrific offensive teams with Hugh McElhaney and Joe Perry, and receiving there Billy Wilson. And then, but they never made it into the championship game because their defense was never up to par.
Right.
He was excellent for 10 years, and the first time I ever learned about him was from the old football cards.
Right. Just as we learned about baseball, cards were so incredibly important.
Oh, yeah.
Were cards important in your day? Maybe we haven't talked about this, Hal Bock, in a while. Your card collecting early on?
Oh, sure. In fact, I wanted to mention this to George. We talked last week about me getting a George Case Jr. card and saying, "What the heck? Where's Stan Musial? Where's?"
I remember you talking about that, Hal. Yes.
Right. Well, now I got to tell you, the picture on that card is the same picture of your dad sliding across home plate that you have on your Timeless Baseball video.
Well, that's great. You know what that was? Well, I appreciate you saying that because that was my dad's favorite photograph. That was taken in 1938, and he was, sliding in, and the fact is that he was out, but he was able to do what he called his fadeaway, and he did a hand tag on the base, and he had that blown up. He had it in his sporting goods store, and I happened to have that photograph, and I decided to put it on our website because I was one to honor my dad's memory, and that was his favorite photograph of all his time in the major leagues.
But I'll tell you,
Hal, maybe we could all get behind this. I proposed a few months ago a Washington Senators Hall of Fame.
There is one, isn't there?
There's two different things, and what Ralph has mentioned. There's the D.C. Hall of Stars, which involved my dad and any major league and player, not only baseball but in football, basketball, coaches, sports writers, and my dad was inducted into that. Then there's also what they call the D.C. Ring of Honor, which is what they have at Nationals Park, which to me is somewhat controversial because it also includes some of the Montreal players. And a lot of people are saying, hey, why don't you just include players who played in Washington, D.C., who are in the Hall of Fame, and not include Montreal? That way, if Montreal gets a team back, then include Montreal. But some of those Montreal players, like Gary Carter, Andre Dawson, and so forth, they never played in Washington, and yet here they are on the Ring of Honor at Nationals Park.
Right. Well, I was just thinking there should be just a Hall of Fame for Washington ball players.
Well, I agree with you, Ralph. And the thing is that there are players now. This Ring of Honor, I just learned this just yesterday. It was originally conceived by those players who were in the Hall of Fame. So it'd be a Walter Johnson or Clark Griffith, Bucky Harris, whatever. But then
Norm Zalchin.
Would
it be Norm Zalchin too?
Yeah, well, no, they included Frank Howard, and Frank Howard is a great Washington player, but is not in the Hall of Fame. So, if you're going to have a Washington Sports Hall of Fame, certainly would include, a Frank Howard, but it would include.
And it would certainly include your dad.
Well, I would think so. I mean, personally, that would be very nice, but I'm not sure that that'll ever happen, but. I would certainly, and I've mentioned this before, I have contacted the Washington Nationals a couple times. I've had friends contact the Washington Nationals a couple times. Hank Thomas, Walter Johnson's grandson, told me the same thing. He said, George, you'll get very little cooperation from the Nationals. They're interested in what happens today. They're not interested in what happened yesterday.
It's typical.
Right.
And they are the true Montreal Expos. I don't understand I can't make heads or tails of that whole moving situation.
Well, no, that's where they came from. I mean, their roots were in Montreal. When Montreal, moved, the team was moved. They had no place to go. They went to Washington. But on the other hand, the Washington Nationals, great franchise, but they're a National League franchise. the Washington Senators, where my dad played, and the Minnesota Twins, who took the Washington Senators players when Washington left and went to Minnesota, they were an American League team. So, people talk about the franchise, and I have to tell them, I say, hey, you have two totally different franchises. You have a National League franchise today, and what was last year and Minnesota yesteryear was American League, not National League. So they're two totally different franchises, two totally different leagues. So it'd be like the AFL and the NFL in football. I mean, there's teams that played, and they're in a separate league. And the AFL and the NFL, two separate leagues, and the American League and the National League, two separate leagues.
They play fast and loose with history in baseball. I'm still trying to get my arms around the fact that the Houston Astros are in the American League.
You're not the only one, Hal.
And the Milwaukee Brewers are in the National League.
I've said that to many people. I said, my gosh, I mean, I'm looking at the Houston Astros. To me, it was a National League team, and now here they are. They're an American League team.
Well, it'd be ironic because if they get into the World Series against the Cubs, they're the only team to play against both the Cubs would be the only team to play in the World Series against both the White Sox and the Cubs.
Very cool. Absolutely.
That is
for a second,
Yeah, I want to get back to Y.A. Tittle for a second. And you guys, I was in the athletic footwear business, and my memory of Y.A. Tittle, I mean, a lot of people probably wouldn't even care, but my memory of Y.A. Tittle, he was wearing high-top football shoes. And most of the players from that era were starting to go to low cuts, but his predecessor later on, Johnny Unitas with the Colts, was also wearing high-top football shoes.
Yes, he did.
As was Connerly.
Right, and most of the players today, when you see a Bart Starr or when you see the great quarterbacks today, and they're all wearing, just about everybody in the NFL are wearing low-cut football shoes. But back then, those quarterbacks, those great quarterbacks, they were wearing high-top football shoes.
Okay. Hey, Hal, George, before we go, I just got to ask you, when you called on the Sixers back in those days, did you call on the equipment manager, Larry Jacobs?
Well, I think I probably met him. I'm not sure, Ralph. I used to go into the, locker rooms and I meet somebody and they had, the Sixers. But to be honest with you,
just a memory from my past. He was a camp buddy.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm sure he was. And the fact is that we used to call on some of the equipment managers, especially in the colleges. But when it came to the pros, you were normally, talking with a specific pro because that's who you would either have a contract with or whatever. And the equipment managers, they were there. And if a player said to the equipment manager, hey, I want to wear Pro-Keds or Converse or Adidas or whatever, that's what the equipment manager would do. In the colleges back then, it was a little bit different. Equipment managers, sometimes you could befriend them, become very good friends, supply him with shoes, and he would tell you, say, hey, if somebody wants to wear your shoe, I'll have a whole stock here in the locker room. I'll be happy to put them on.
Nice. Nice. All right, guys, as usual, terrific. I hope I didn't shortchange anybody. As I've been doing, I want to ask you guys if you have anything to add, anything that you'd like to contribute before I close it out.
I'll just say one thing. The second Washington Senators, the one that are now in Texas, in the 11 years in Washington, never had a Hall of Fame player play an inning for them.
Right. You're absolutely right. They did not, Alan, and that's why I'm glad that they, have inducted into this Ring of Stars, Frank Howard, because he was the superstar of those Washington clubs. They really had no power, and yet when they had Frank Howard, I mean, he hit some absolutely mammoth home runs in Washington, and it should be remembered. He's a great, great player.
Well, here's some completely useless Washington Senators, Texas Rangers trivia. Out of all the Major League Baseball players whose names you could spell frontwards and backwards the same way, they had two of them, Dick Nin and Toby Harrah.
Very good.
What does that mean? I don't know.
Hey, that's terrific. I never thought about that, but you're absolutely right there, Tony. That's great.
And they had your dad coaching for him, George.
Yeah, he did. And as a matter of fact, I think Dick Nen might have played for my dad in Hawaii. A lot of those Washington players, my dad was managing the Hawaii Islanders.
I didn't know that.
It was a AAA franchise. And I think that Nen, I know Brand Allier.
Nen was a pretty damn good breeder, too, because his son was a terrific relief pitcher with the Giants.
Ron Nen, yeah.
Yeah, he literally left his arm on the field to pitch in that World Series. Great competitor, and I didn't then go on with the senior. Wasn't he a Dodger too? I think he came from the Dodgers.
Dick Nen, he had a key home run for them against the Cardinals in 1963, which basically broke the Cardinals and won something like 19 out of 20 games. The Dodgers went into St. Louis and swept the series there, and and then home run won the first game, and that basically won the pennant for the Dodgers in 1963.
Okay.
I remember.
I just got to ask. I'm going to ask, is there anything you don't know?
Oh, plenty. But I was in Pittsburgh.
He's a walking encyclopedia. He's amazing.
Is it amazing? We on these different shows, sometimes he'll correct a year or correct a day.
It scares me a little bit,
Yeah, it scares, right. Absolutely.
I hope not. It's something I was born with. It doesn't make me better or worse than anybody else.
No,
that's total recall, Alan. It's wonderful.
Any better a person, but it certainly makes you a better intellect. Wow. And I've been doing this a year and a half with you, and I could still say at times, wow.
Well, I'm 74, and I'm not slipping yet. So
right,
great.
Keep it going, Big Al.
Okay,
appreciate that. Marty, thanks for popping in. Please come back time and time again. You guys can talk boxing. I don't know, Hal, did you cover boxing at all as well?
Covered a little, sure.
As Murray?
Well, I didn't cover with Murray. I covered after Murray. But and I didn't cover a lot of boxing, but I covered some of the big fights, the really memorable fights. The most memorable, I guess, that I covered was Ali's last fight in Jamaica, and it was quite a scene in a soccer field, and he was dressing in a little cramped trailer, and it was just, here's this greatest champion of all time, maybe, and reduced to this kind of an ending. It was kind of sad, but I covered some boxing. Yes.
Hey, I think I may have a surprise, and I hope Tony will come back and join us when it happens in the next few weeks. The Bayonne bomber, Chuck Webner.
Yeah. Oh my God.
He's going to guest on these airways.
Chuck's terrific. He really is.
Yeah. So
very decent.
And Tony introduced me to his wife, basically, who's the go-between. She's charming, and we're going to get him to come on, and I'm working on it. Let's put it that way. Right. So
that's great.
Thank you, and if you're out there listening, keep on keeping on. We'll be back next week and enjoying it as we go. Thank you, gentlemen.
Good night, everybody.
Thank you. Yep. Good night, everybody. Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night.